Hey, what's going on, everybody? Jay here. Welcome back to the channel. If you are new here, welcome to the channel for the first time. I appreciate you stopping by, and thank you so much for checking out today's video. And this is one I haven't done in a while. I haven't done a good old-fashioned ranking video in a minute. I think probably since Cowabunga Collection dropped. And with the release of the Final Fantasy Pixel Remasters, that's 1 through 6, I wanted to talk about what is one of my favorite video game series of all time in Final Fantasy. On the Nintendo Switch now, you are able to play Final Fantasy 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 12. And what I wanted to do today was rank those games. I wanted to rank the versions that are on the Switch, not necessarily the game itself, although that is going to play a part as well. So what do you say? Let's take a look at all those Final Fantasy games on the Nintendo Switch. Let's rank them. Some of y'all are going to be pissed off at Final Fantasy VII.
So when I think of classic RPG series, the first one that really comes to mind for me outside of the Suikoden franchise is Final Fantasy. It wasn't the first RPG I had ever played on a home console. That would have been Dragon Warrior 1, which was sent out by Nintendo to Nintendo Power subscribers, but I remember seeing Final Fantasy featured in Nintendo Power, and I was just completely enamored with the idea of what the game was. And I remember I was visiting my grandparents for the summer down in Florida, and we went to Blockbuster the following week and rented it, and I was absolutely blown away by my experience with the game. In modern terms, it's a very simple title. It's very basic, not a whole lot of real storyline going on other than you are the good guys beat the bad guy. But the game itself is sound, and there's a lot of things that started with this first game that are still seen in future iterations. The different classes, a lot of the kind of ideas behind the title, with being able to move around by airship and things like that. And it was a really excellent title. Now, the Pixel Remaster is pretty great. There's a lot of really good quality of life improvements on top of the obvious ones. Like, the visuals in the game look great now. The music is updated and now arranged, although you can switch between that and the standard chiptune music from the original NES release. You can move on a diagonal now, which is really nice and kind of cuts down on a lot of the travel issues. There's auto battling. You can adjust the experience multiplier between 0 and 4. You can turn off random encounters. I also really like that there is an option of having either the initial pixelated font or having the new and, in some cases, improved font in the game. It's actually really easy to read on the OLED, which I really appreciate in handheld mode. It's a lot of stuff that really pluses what the original experience of the game was, while still maintaining that initial soul of the title and still feeling like the original Final Fantasy. Now, with that also means it's the worst of the bunch in the grand scheme of things. It's a very, very standard, simple, basic title, but it sets a lot of place settings for what's going to come later on. As much as I love it, if I'm looking at it purely outside of just nostalgia goggles on what I know about this title, I can't give it anything over a C. It's a average game compared to other titles on this list, and when I'm comparing and ranking against other Final Fantasy games, this is the baseline C. Nothing, however, will get lower than this one. Now, when it comes to Final Fantasy II, this is one that I hadn't really spent a whole lot of time with, and I'm pretty excited to actually get into this one because it's a really interesting kind of improvement over the original. Now, I need to point out something real quick. All of the Pixel Remasters, I didn't mention this on the first one, but all of the Pixel Remasters are going to have both the arranged and the original chiptune soundtrack, no matter if it was an NES or SNES game. You're going to have the boost features to turn off random encounters or to adjust your experience from 0 to 4 times. You can switch the font from the modern font to the pixelated font, and each of them are going to have extras like a bestiary, illustration gallery, and music player. So you get some pluses there. Now, I said it's an improvement over the original, and the most important thing to recognize with this game is that you have actual characters now as opposed to blank slates. You are going to play as Firion, Guy, Maria, and Leon. And one of the big changes in the game, and probably the most drastic change and the biggest risk they really took and made something kind of magical here, is that there's no experience points in this game. Instead of basing things based on a set number of experience points earned from defeating monsters to increase your level or increase your abilities, what's going to happen is as you play, the different abilities you use are going to tailor and kind of mold the character to the way you play. So if you are using a lot of magic attacks in the game, your magic points are going to go up. If you deal a lot of damage, your hit points may go up, things like that. It's a really clever take and a really interesting style of kind of making this game work, and I'm really, really enjoying it. There's also some other changes as well. Like, this is actually the first time we had chocobos introduced. There's a neat kind of ask or memorize feature now where you're going to see a word highlighted in conversations with other characters, and you can ask about that. That might give you something to memorize for later on, or will actually give more lore and more in-depth conversation about things you're experiencing. It's a really clever game. I'm thoroughly enjoying it. It's a nice improvement over the original. I don't want to say it's a major step forward because while it is kind of an ambitious take on the experience leveling, things like that, I don't know that it necessarily sticks the landing. I think it's a little bit clunky, so I can't quite bump it all the way up. I'm going to give it a C+. It's definitely an improvement over the original game, but I think it fumbles a little bit. So C+ for Final Fantasy II. Final Fantasy III is where things take a drastic change, and all for the better. Turn-based combat remains. What returns is the experience point system featured in the original Final Fantasy, rather than the kind of tailor-made experience leveling system from the second game. Character classes are also back. However, it's not directly what we experienced in the first Final Fantasy. We actually have jobs introduced in this one, which is one of my favorite things that the Final Fantasy series does. These are interchangeable classes. Any character can be anything, and as you play, the different jobs you take on are going to affect the different items, weapons, skills, and anything like that that you can actually utilize in the title. You're going to have capacity points, which are awarded to the entire party after each battle, and switching jobs will consume some of those capacity points. It's also going to be the first game that introduces special attacks. So, for example, a Dragoon will get Jump, or a Thief will get Steal. It's something where you're going to be able to use these new abilities to really kind of immerse yourself a little bit more in the gameplay. It also features summoned creatures, which is another Final Fantasy signature. This is a magnificent game. The characters in it are fantastic. You have a really clever storyline, and being able to tailor make your characters as you play to be whatever you want is really kind of remarkable. I love the job system. It's not something that sticks around in every single turn-based or mainline Final Fantasy game, but when it does appear, it's a welcome addition to the title. This is something I'm thoroughly enjoying, and I think it is a magnificent game. Final Fantasy III is getting a B+ from me. Simply put, Final Fantasy IV is one of the absolute best games in the entire series. The cast of characters is immense compared to everything else that we've experienced thus far, with 12 different playable characters, all of whom have different abilities and different classes, and a deep, resonating storyline. It's emotional, it's impactful, it's funny at times. It's everything that kind of signature Final Fantasy experience has really become for me. And the Super Nintendo release, as well as this considerable, fantastic release here with the Pixel Remaster, really shows what Square was able to do with more power, because everything from the first series on the NES is improved. I am absolutely head over heels in love with Final Fantasy IV. The gameplay is magnificent. It introduced the active time battle system, which is the first time it was ever featured in a Final Fantasy game. So rather than this just being completely turn-based, each character was going to have a gauge that would fill up and allow you to attack more quickly based on different factors. Some monsters are faster than your characters, which will result in them attacking more often than your characters are able to. It's just a wonderful title. Characters like Cecil and Rosa and Rydia it's a wonderful game with memorable experiences for every character in there. It's such a great exploration of things that would become signature experiences later down the road. Like, there's a lot of things that happen in 4 that I feel really set the table for Final Fantasy VII in a way, as well as some of the things in Final Fantasy VI. It's just a magnificent game. I have to give Final Fantasy IV an S. It's one of my favorite Final Fantasy entries, an absolutely brilliant addition on this Pixel Remaster, and a wonderful game to play. Final Fantasy V brings us back to a limited number of playable characters with only 5, as well as the job system coming back, and there's some other key improvements as well, although I think the fewer characters isn't really so much an improvement over 4 as it is just a change, really. You are back to having the active time battle system, which is great. You can actually anticipate when you're going to be able to attack, which is really nice. And that's kind of it. So for Final Fantasy V, there are different classes that you're able to get, and it all depends on which crystals you have. So to start off, you're a freelancer. It's just a basic job. Anyone can really do it, but after that, there's a bunch of different ones as well. Wind crystal jobs include the Knight, the Monk, the Thief, the Black Mage, White Mage, and Blue Mage, making its debut in the series. Water crystal gives you Red Mage, Time Mage, Summoner, Berserker, Mystic Knight, and Mime. Fire crystal gives you Beastmaster, Geomancer, Ninja, Ranger, and Bard. And Earth crystal gives you Dragoon, Dancer, Samurai, and Chemist. Now, these are all different jobs that you're able to get for any character in the game with different abilities, and it's again a way to tailor-make the game to the way you want to play it. And it sets a lot of stage for things like Final Fantasy Tactics down the road, which also has a massive job system, as we all know. I really like Final Fantasy V. I think the story's really fun, but I will say it does kind of pull things back a bit from Final Fantasy IV, which was just a superlative title. This isn't a bad game by any stretch of the imagination, but it's just not one that I'm totally enamored with yet. I'm going to be putting more time into it, playing it more to see if it's something that I really enjoy, but the first 3 or 4 hours I've put into it, it's just not really connecting with me. And that's been true every time I've tried to play it. So while Final Fantasy IV was an S, I think I have to give Final Fantasy V a B-. It's a good game. It's definitely got some improvements over previous entries in the series, but for some reason, it's just not connecting with me. Final Fantasy VI is, without a doubt, number one with a bullet for me as far as any Final Fantasy game goes ever. I love every character in the game, yes, even Gao. I like all of the locations in the game. I think the gameplay is spectacular. The cast of characters is magnificent. The different abilities and the summons and the espers that you're able to get make this game just a superlative experience for me. Every enemy in the game is memorable, with none being greater than the single greatest antagonist in the history of video games in Kefka. The bait and switch of Kefka being the real power behind the evil in the world is just amazing to me. The deeply emotional character arcs that are in play throughout the entirety of the game are fantastic. The Opera House scene alone is probably my favorite video game scene ever from any game. It's just such a wonderful experience and such an amazing title that I lose myself playing it every time I go back to it. The Pixel Remaster doesn't do a ton to really plus the original experience because the original experience was kind of perfect outside of things like having the arranged soundtrack. So I can't really say that it does better than any other previous release of the game because it was already a perfect experience for me. And they didn't screw it up. It's beautiful. It's wonderful. It's magnificent. It's magical. It is the signature Final Fantasy experience for me. There's nothing that's ever equaled it. There's nothing that will ever beat it. Final Fantasy VI is an S+ for me and will always be my number one Final Fantasy experience. Alright, so here we go. This is Final Fantasy VII, and I do anticipate that this is going to probably annoy some people. Now, when I tell you that Final Fantasy VII is one of my least favorite Final Fantasies, understand that that is with a gigantic container full of salt, because I actually really like most Final Fantasy games. Like, the ones I don't like are things like Crystal Chronicles, which just didn't connect for me. My issue primarily with Final Fantasy VII is the fact that I think it's a really ugly game. Taking the pre-rendered backgrounds out of the equation, which are stunning, the character models in the game are kind of hideous. The enemies are okay, but they don't really hit me with any kind of emotional impact. Like, I don't care about any of the characters in the game outside of like Tifa, Yuffie, and Cid. They're just kind of there. I don't like Cloud as a protagonist. Aerith was never someone that I really felt any kind of emotional attachment to. I don't know. The game just didn't land for me. Until I played the Final Fantasy VII Remake, when I started to appreciate the characters a little bit more and enjoy the world a little bit more. So I started playing this again after I played the Final Fantasy VII Remake, and I enjoyed it a lot more than the first time when I played it. I still don't think it's a great game, and I still think it's a pretty hideous game to look at. And this remaster on the Switch doesn't do it a lot of favors because some of the angles are different than the original, and some of the, I don't know, it doesn't look quite as good as what we experienced on CRTs on the PS1. And I'm not a huge CRT fan, but in this case, it really helped a lot of the problems that are really blatantly apparent in this version of Final Fantasy VII. It's not a bad game. And I'm saying all of this, and a lot of people are probably thinking I'm going to give it a low grade. I'm not. I'm going to give it a B. It's a solid B. I think it's a decidedly above average title. And for some people where it's an S, I can't argue that, and I wouldn't dissuade you for saying that because I know how deeply important this game is to people. But for someone who played this well after Final Fantasy VI, it just doesn't resonate with me the same way that 6 did. It's a good game. It's definitely a B. I would even probably go so far as to say a B+, but I think for this particular Switch port, this version of the game, it's a B, and I'm okay with that ranking. I think the game that benefited the most from the HD remasters on the Switch is Final Fantasy VIII, which, much like Final Fantasy VII, was kind of an ugly title to behold on its initial release. But this one here actually really improves things in many, many ways. I'm a big fan of Final Fantasy VIII. I really liked the characters in the game. I thought that the way it was set up and kind of seeing Squall's growth as a character throughout the title made it a little bit more intriguing to me because I felt like he wasn't just a one-note character. I think he actually kind of really grew as both a character and a protagonist as the game went on. And I liked everyone else in the game as well, whether it was Zell or Rinoa. I thought the game was a lot more accessible than 7, and I think the visual improvements that are really apparent here and were also apparent on its initial release on the PS1 just made it something that I was able to fall into more easily. Now, I know looks shouldn't be everything, but when I'm playing a game, I at least want it to be visually appealing, and I think 8 gets there more than 7 ever did. And one of the most important things that 8 did, of course, is Triple Triad. I love the card game. It's one of my favorite things that Final Fantasy has ever done was adding Triple Triad into this title, and it's something that immediately bumps it up for me when I compare it to Final Fantasy VII. Are there weaknesses here? There absolutely are weaknesses inherent in this game, and it is not a perfect experience by any stretch of the imagination, but I think the things that it does better than 7 for me put it up above it in the rankings. I'm giving Final Fantasy VIII an A. In particular, this Switch remaster making it look as good as it does is a welcome addition to this title's history. As much as I like Final Fantasy VIII, and as much as I appreciate Final Fantasy VII, even if it isn't my favorite entry in the series, I think Final Fantasy IX is the best entry on the PlayStation 1. And it's because it kind of leaned back into its roots from the original releases on the NES and the SNES. This one to me felt more like a Final Fantasy game. As much as I liked 7 and 8, 9 felt like a proper fantasy adventure. You had memorable characters that were a little bit cartoony in appearance. Well, okay, they were a lot cartoony in appearance, let's be honest here. One is a monkey man, one is a fire hydrant in armor, one is an awesome black mage, VV for life. It's just a really engrossing visually game that I think does so much and shows off what the PS1 was really capable of once people got the system into their hands and were able to really strongly develop for it. The storyline is wonderful. The gameplay is magnificent. There's so much that the game does really well that as much as I know that people love this, I honestly feel like it's a little bit underappreciated because so many people gravitate towards 7 because it was their first experience on the PS1, but everything that 7 did, 9 does so much better. And everything that 8 did, with the exception of Triple Triad, 9 does so much better. It's a wonderful title. The remaster here on the Switch is gorgeous to look at, and while it definitely shows its age in places, because, I mean, let's face it, it's a 20-year-old game at this point, what it does so ridiculously well, and it's so easy to pick up and just lose yourself in. I love this one. It's a magnificent game, and it's going to be an S. Not going to lie to you, never played Final Fantasy Tevin. Tevin? Final Fantasy Kevin.
Angela's cats are cute. So cute that you just want to eat them. But you can't eat cats. You can't eat cats, Kevin.
Not gonna lie to you, I never played Final Fantasy X before this year. I had booted it up a couple of times. I had looked at it. I wanted to show off what it looked like on videos and things like that, but it just wasn't something that I ever really felt the desire to play. I don't know why. I couldn't get into it. Like, it just didn't click for me until I played it this year. And when I first had the idea to do this video, when the Pixel Remasters were announced to be releasing for the Switch, I was like, oh, I'm going to do this Final Fantasy video. Definitely going to do this. 10 will probably be a D, but I expected it to be a low-ranked game, and then I got into it, and I'm not going to lie to you, this is such a remarkable game. It has a magnificent look. The characters are a little wonky, and I haven't beaten it yet, so I'm going to say that right now. So this is a review without having beaten the title, but the characters I've met so far, I really enjoy. They're a little weird. They're definitely Final Fantasy characters. There's no question about that, but I really like them. I like the kind of idea of your main protagonist being a sports star. I think that's incredibly clever and not something I would have ever expected Final Fantasy to pursue. I appreciate that the cast is diverse. Not everyone is just a lily white guy. Everyone has a different look, which is something that I think Final Fantasy VII did incredibly well as well. I really enjoy this one. I'm shocked to say it because I didn't expect to, but it's something where I boot it up, I just have a lot of fun playing it, and really, isn't that what you want from a video game, is to have fun? This game delivers that in spades. I'm actually really looking forward to beating it so I can play Final Fantasy X too. I know that's not a mainline entry, it's a different kind of game entirely, but I enjoy the characters enough that I really want to keep the adventure moving forward. I wish this was something we got more entries in, because honestly, it's kind of remarkable. I really, really appreciate this one, and I'm really enjoying it. I'm going to give Final Fantasy X an A-. It's well above average. It's almost excellent. Not quite to that level yet, but I still think it's wonderful. This is a really solid game. This is the ultimate example of a game not connecting with me upon its initial release, and it being on the Switch before it landed for me. I remember when 12 dropped, I was ecstatic that it was coming out. I was so looking forward to it because it took place on Ivalice, which is where Final Fantasy Tactics took place, which is one of my all-time favorite games. I was really excited to get back to it, but when I got the Steelbook, when it released, I couldn't stand the game. I had no fun with it. I didn't enjoy the combat system. I didn't enjoy the job wheel. I didn't like any of it. It just did not land for me. So when Final Fantasy XII The Zodiac Age dropped on the Switch, I was curious about it because I wanted to kind of give the game a fair shot. I wanted to try it again, but I was convinced I wasn't going to like it. I didn't think I was going to have fun with it. And I'm so happy that I was wrong about that, because Final Fantasy XII is magnificent. This is a beautiful title. The gameplay is wonderful. I do think there are certain things about the game. Like, I think some of the zones are either way too big or way too small. There's not a lot of zones that really find that happy medium. I think the combat is really good, although it does take itself kind of out of what people are used to with Final Fantasy. Although I think what we saw going forward, this is the kind of combat we saw in Final Fantasy 15, just kind of perfected. But it's not really what folks were used to, so I can see why this didn't land for some people, because this wasn't an active time battle or a turn-based game. It was a little bit different. I think the job system is a bit clunky. Like, there's a lot of really great ideas in this game that it doesn't quite stick the landing on. But despite that, I still really enjoy it. And I think Final Fantasy XII The Zodiac Age is the best version of this game ever released. I'm not going to tell you that it's a perfect title by any stretch of the imagination, and if this is a game that doesn't connect for you, I can completely see the flaws in it, and I can completely understand why. But for me, it's a game I thoroughly love after hating the original release. So I'm going to give Final Fantasy XII a B+, because I do see the weaknesses inherent in the design. It's not a perfect game, decidedly above average, though.
There you have it, my friends. Final Fantasies 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and 12 ranked on the Nintendo Switch. Like I said, some of you are going to be upset about Final Fantasy VII, but just understand it was never my game. It was never the one that I fell in love with. I still appreciate it. I'm actually enjoying it more on this Switch port than I ever did on the original PS1, and if it was anything like the remake, I would have loved it, because the remake is incredible. Let me know in the comments down below. How right am I? How wrong am I? Do you agree? Do you disagree? What is your favorite Final Fantasy? And are there any other Final Fantasy games you would like to see brought over to the Switch? Actually kind of surprised we haven't gotten 13 brought over yet. Until next time, folks, I've been Jay. I appreciate you spending a little bit of time with me. Remember to play more games, stay square, and take care. I'll talk to you soon.
I just want to lie on the beach and eat hot dogs. That's all I've ever wanted.